standing in front of Richard Nixon's humble farmhouse birthplace at his presidential library in Yorba Linda, California 23 years ago this month. I delivered a eulogy for an American giant. As I look back at that day, I'm flooded with memories of President Nixon, including decades I spent at his side, and it strikes me. Our leaders today may need a dose of Nixonian pragmatism in their decision-making. I predicted on rain-soaked afternoon, the second half of the 20th century would be known as the Age of Nixon. Today, I can say with confidence, the beginning of the 21st century is still the Age of Nixon. We're still living in the world he played a role in shaping. Though our country has changed in many ways in the 43 years since Nixon's resignation, and 23 years since his death, the basic domestic policies and international order that he brought to fruition remain in place. Amid partisan strife, what can today's leaders in Washington learn from a man who thought with great depth about his era and the long-term impact of the tough choices he would have to make for his country? They can learn what a cohesive, well thought out and well executed, America-centered foreign policy looks like. The core elements of Nixon's transformative foreign policies are still with us, especially with regard to America's relationship with China. It is important that both the U.S. and China see the benefits of working together on geopolitical issues of importance and consequence. And President Trump's recent meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping seems to have been an important first step in reaffirming ideal and building personal relationships. Nixon realigned geopolitical pillars throughout the world to fit American interests. As I said in my eulogy, he was without a doubt the 20th century's greatest architect of peace. Today's leaders can also learn to think in terms of national interest versus becoming a prisoner to ideology. Of course, Nixon was a partisan, and few possessed such seasoned political antennae as he did. But above all, he was a pragmatist, not an ideologue. When Nixon took office in 1969, America was divided and distressed, not totally unlike today. He was the first president in 120 years since Zachary Taylor to be sworn in with both houses of Congress controlled by the opposition party. Yet he worked with Democrats to transform the country and responded to the cries of the time by reaching across the aisle and accomplishing legislative victories with dramatic legacies. These negotiations resulted in Nixon's oft-forgotten, or more likely, unknown, domestic initiatives, many quite progressive, which continue to help countless Americans. Nixon equaled the playing field by signing Title X. The federal civil rights law prohibits sex discrimination in education. Nixon pledged the first federal dollars to fight cancer. Nixon ended military conscription, as George Shultz has masterfully recounted. Nixon personally fought to desegregate Southern schools. Nixon revolutionized government policies toward American Indians and returned scores of historically tribal lands. And Nixon introduced the first bold welfare reform legislation, laying out the principles of a landmark bipartisan bill that I worked to pass, and which was signed by President Bill Clinton 2 decades later. It was Nixon who, by ending the Vietnam War, brought nearly 600 prisoners of war home to their wives and families. A special exhibit opening next month at the Dole Institute at Kansas University will tell the stories of these remarkable POW wives. All this occurred in the throes of the late 1960s. and early 1970s, a turbulent era that makes today's upheaval look almost placid in comparison. Despite his Washington experience, Nixon was always considered an outsider. His loyalties, overwhelmingly, were to millions of hardworking, patriotic Americans to whom he referred as the silent majority. That's because Nixon was one of them. Born a grocer's son in an 800 square foot house with no running water, he certainly did not possess the pedigree of a Washington princeling. But he put that indomitable spirit and drive to work, rising quickly to become a representative, senator, vice president, and president. By the time he died, he was an invaluable counselor to presidents and many other leaders in Washington, including me in my years in the Senate Republican leadership. On a personal note, having lost sensation in my right hand from combat injuries I sustained during World War I, it was always particularly meaningful to me. Nixon extended his left hand to me whenever we had the occasion to meet. He was a larger-than-life figure, yet he managed to remember the little things that truly mattered. Nixon, of course, remains controversial. Not even his family and his most ardent of supporters can deny that. But the fact Nixon continues to loom large over today's hyper-competitive political environment is a testament to his profound political and cultural significance, as well as his enduring relevance today. To him, controversy was merely an inevitable byproduct of leadership. If you are not controversial, he said on more than one occasion, it means you never stood for anything. As we continue to evaluate Nixon's life and presidency, I'm pleased by the fact that more and more scholars and authors are delving into the vast archive now at the Nixon Library. Julie Nixon Eisenhower fought years employing a tactful combination of her father's indomitability and her mother's steely grace to ensure the library became part of the National Archives system. Just last year it underwent a remarkable renovation as well. Because of those efforts decades in the making, scholars only now are starting to produce volumes, transcend, and revise the cliched narratives about Nixon developed in the charged political environment of the Watergate era. Today's Washington leaders ought to take a trip to Yorba Linda. I suspect they'd learn much from a thoughtful leader with unique vision, determination, perseverance, and conviction that I knew all too well.